The book that will forever change our ideas about the Bible, The Gods Coming from Space, by Mauro Biglino. We're going to give this audiobook or this ebook a read, and I'm going to record it audiobook style. This is my first time reading this. I did read a little bit of this guy's work like years ago, back in 2015, and I'm not sure if it was this exact same book. It might have been one of his other ones, but all right, let's get into it. So this was done in 2013. You know, a lot of this guy's work, it's not even in English. I was looking up some podcasts of this guy, and all his podcasts, he's not speaking English. He has to have a translator. So it's difficult to find a lot of this guy's stuff in English. Okay, so I'm going through each little slide here. It says, God of the sun, often you would tell the sun cannot be wounded. And it says it dies, and in parentheses it says at sunset for a few hours. Introduction. Many books have been written addressing the issue of ancient human cultures having contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. The hypothesis that these alien visitors are very possibly the source of our own physical origin as well as our cultural evolution. Such books have approached the topic by quoting and analyzing experts from the Old Testament based on established translations such as the King James Version, the Bible we all know. Is there a chance to learn more, go deeper, transform our current assumptions into certainties, and have accurate feedback? Starting from the original Hebrew, the ancient text of the Old Testament, this translation has now been simplified. In the pages that follow, we will publish the exact and literal meaning of each letter and phrase in Hebrew translated into English. So remember, Mauro Biglino, his job, he was a translator for the Vatican. But from what I understand, they fired him for exposing all the stuff that we're going to learn about in these kind of books. Hence, the surprise for hypotheses that the church cannot avow because they would undermine the foundations of faith, a made-up credo which speaks of God who created the man in his own image and resemblance. See, that's why he got fired. And all this stuff about these metaphors, like in the one in the Bible where it says God created man in his own image, that's just a reference to genetic manipulation. God taking some of his DNA, some of his genetic material, and splicing it with another species and then creating a hybrid slave species to worship them, which is us. Holy Bible aliens. Those passages that clearly mention the presence of alien life and extraterrestrial intervention are quoted in the original Hebrew language, followed by an accurate literal translation, word by word, using a unique and easy-to-follow graphic system that immediately links to the original text. This enables the reader to have direct access to the biblical text. Modern-day Judeo-Christian traditions will probably never acknowledge this information to the public, as it would tear down the facade of their man-made invention of one all-knowing, all-seeing God who created mankind. Once that facade is gone, the structures that we know as Christianity, Judaism, are likely to crumble down right along with it. The implications are staggering. In the pages that follow, we will examine Ezekiel's version of a celestial chariot, also known as a UFO, and the story of Elijah's kidnapping, abduction. In addition, we will analyze the versions of Zechariah and Kivod, the son of God's so-called glory, the concept of Baraka, and also the biblical passages relating to, quote-unquote, angels. So this is the exact same stuff that I've been trying to tell people for years and years. So I grew up in a Christian church where they tried to brainwash everyone with Christianity, and I always felt like something was not right. So I've been started looking into all these other works. And I've been saying this for like years and years. Like, the gods are just aliens. They were coming down here and doing all kinds of genetic experiments and enslaving people and causing all kinds of problems and creating the wars and having sex with people and impregnating the daughters of men and creating hybrids. And that's why we're like this today, because we are their offspring. All right, let's continue. Perhaps most interestingly, you will be able to read the literal translation of the verses which describe the creation of man, a translation that can confirm a surprising, fascinating, and unexpected possible truth considering the book at issue, the Bible. We will look at another old passage, or another passage in the Old Testament, which includes the disconcerting statement, God dies. An easy reading. This work stems from a careful analysis of the text, relying on the original meaning of consonant roots which represent the basis of the Hebrew vocabulary as published in the dictionaries of Biblical and Aramaic Hebrew used worldwide. To date, these original meanings have been either generally not examined or deliberately not taken into account. You will also read about the assertions of those church exponents who deal with these issues that are extremely delicate and potentially risky to the Jewish Christian theology. This work is complemented by the analysis of external documentation, texts, and stories that confirm what the Old Testament Bible tells us. This examination of literal translations from the original Hebrew text, which include the exact passages quoted, makes this translation useful to both the scholar as well as the reader who is approaching this material for the first time. The book closes with hypothetical reconstruction of historical events formulated on the basis of the new information. We present a new history of the new man which arises out of us now having direct access to the original source of the texts. The chapter of this book, the chapter of this book are constructed so that the reader can study them, also be read separately without the need to follow the numerical sequence, and can therefore be used as an easy means of comparison and reference. A fundamental question. This exegesis, I'm not sure if I pronounced that word right. Let me look that up really quick. Hang on one second. Defines data structured from storing a machine-readable database in CPU architectures. Okay. All right, let me find my spot here again. Hang on one second. If the God described in the Bible is not a spiritual and transcendent God, but instead an extraterrestrial visitor or visitors, should we still refer to this information as divinely inspired or sacred texts? No, of course not. That's what I've been saying for like years. From where and from whom do they originate? In the 10th chapter, when we plunge into canonical Christian texts that is universally regarded as the most mystical and inspired, the Gospel of John, here, again, the reader may be surprised to learn that some additional information which will allow him or her to continue on this journey, a free path of correct knowledge. Have a good trip. Directions on how to read the passages quoted in Hebrew through literal translation. In transcribing the Hebrew text, only the consonants are indicated using the original source as it was before. The vocalization made by macerates and pointers. The following pattern illustrates that we want to provide the reader, or what we wanted to provide the reader. Okay, now it's actually giving examples of like Hebrew, and then it's translating them into English for us, and showing us how to pronounce them. So it's showing. It says, "With our image as our resemblance," as the first line contains the phrase written in Hebrew, which is to be read from right to left. The second line contains English translations following the precise order of the Hebrew text, each single word separated from the other by a dash is to be read from right to left in order to acquire meaning. Dashes are used to highlight the single components of a term which must be analyzed when making literal translation. So this is teaching us like how to cipher Hebrew. Okay, so it's showing us some maps. This is an audio or an ebook, so I'm just kind of clicking through each slide. So now it's showing some different maps. Okay, next page says, and it's got a bunch of Hebrew letters here, and it says Anakim is how to pronounce it. And it says the long-necked men. Old Testament writings are generally derived from stories written by other people, such as the ancient Sumerians. These stories have given rise to certain theories which are summarized here in the first chapter. These theories, we can call them truths that once confirmed will cause the theories that once confirmed will cause the end of a great illusion. Our current religious thought system based on concepts developed by men. This religious thought system, which includes Christianity, is being operated by those who have exploited pretentiously named sacred texts in order to build a structure of power, or a power structure of control and manipulation. Wow, just like I've been saying for like years and years on YouTube. It is time for all that to end, and it is time for the truth. For instance, we are interested in knowing how, where, and when the Bible speaks of Anakim, concrete beings that have come to earth from other worlds. Though the Roman Catholic Church now acknowledges this information, they continue to misleadingly represent the Anakim as spiritual entities. As we analyze the Old Testament, we will identify these concrete beings using their correct Hebrew names. For instance, those who from heaven to earth came. In Hebrew are Anakiti, instead of the well-known published Sumerian name Anunnaki. This is a story that can be disconcerting for some, but certainly full of fascination, and one that also brings an overwhelming liberating potential for those who walk a free-thinking path. It is a story far removed from dogmas, illusions, and forced interpretations of modern Christianity. Modern religions tend to be adapted to a preconceived vision of divinity, which immediately identifies the presence of the Word God with transcendence. They create an alternative world, a divinity far from man in substance and form, undefined, vague, and not able to be represented. You will soon find out that the Bible talks of many other gods, plural, quote unquote, gods, plural with an S, like I've been saying. Precisely, the most ancient texts tell the story of these gods in connection with the origin of men and Jewish people. These texts tell about times when men still walked with gods, which were named Anakims, Elohims, it says in parentheses. We find that men used to talk and eat with them, make arrangements with them, and serve them, but also use them and betray them, follow and abandon them, all according to the interests of the moment and the contingent circumstances. This was this was a historical era when men could choose their gods from among the many possibilities, never asking the question of just one God. The divine was perceived in a totally different way from that which was to eventually, or for that which was to be eventually built once men lost his direct contact. The basic assumption in reconstructing the human history, scholars have progressively predated the origins of civilization. Firstly, they considered the Greek culture, then they moved their attention to the grandeur of ancient Egypt until they discovered Babylonian and Assyria. Finally, they turned their attention to their Sumerian ancestors, a civilization dating back even earlier, yet to around 3000 BC. And the Sumerians are indeed the source of those theories mentioned in the opening chapter. So what do the founders of the whole human civilization tell us? First of all, we are told that there is a planet in our solar system unofficially called Nibiru, which has a long retrograde orbit equal to 3,600 earthly years. Its name, Nibiru, means crossing planet because this celestial body crosses the ellipse in the opposite direction traveled by the other planets, Mars and Jupiter in particular. This retrograde orbit lets us assume that Nibiru was not generated along with the sun like other planets. It must have been attracted or captured by the gravitational forces in our solar system, and this is exactly what Sumerian tales say, according to those authors' interpretations that official science considers, quote-unquote, alternative. A satellite of this planet could actually have impacted the Earth, producing not only the Great Depression, which is also located under the Pacific Ocean, but also could have formed the moon and created the asteroid belts. But what does modern science say? Here is a brief summary of the findings and the official positions of the scientific community that somehow confirm the aforementioned incredible, unacceptable astronomical hypothesis. In 1999, Mario Di Martino, astronomer at the Astronomical Observatory of Torino, found that the deviations of the orbit of 82 comets, including the famous Halley's Comet, are due to a large planet about 3 times Jupiter with a retrograde orbit that, compared to the orbital planes of the other planets, is inclined at 25 astronomical units from the Sun. In 1972, examining Halley's Comet trajectory, J. Bradley, in parentheses, says from the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, California, found out that also the orbit of this comet, like those of Uranus and Neptune, were disrupted. To explain this phenomenon, he assumed the existence of a quote-unquote planet X at a distance of 64 astronomical units from the sun, and then in parentheses it says Pluto is 39 astronomical units, with an orbital period of 1,800 earthly years, half the period indicated by Sumerians, characterized by the retrograde orbit. NASA Pioneer missions have largely confirmed that there must be a celestial body about twice the size of Earth within the solar orbit at a distance of at least 2.4 billion kilometers beyond Pluto, with an orbital period of more than 1,000 years. James Christie from the U.S. Naval Observatory has suggested that the inclination of Pluto and Uranus, the movement of Pluto, and the retrograde orbit of Triton, one of Neptune's moons, are due to the passage of a quote-unquote intruder planet in the solar system, roughly 2 to 5 times the size of Earth, with an orbit inclined at a distance of about 2.4 billion kilometers beyond Pluto. Ray Reynolds from the Ames Research Center says that astronomers are so confident of the existence of this planet X that they only have to name it. It's called Planet X not only because it is still formally unknown, but also because it would be the 10th planet in the solar system. In addition, the nine already known: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. As a result of research carried out by IRIS, which stands for Infrared Astronomical Observatory, the heat detected the presence of a large body in the area of the Orion constellation, which moves very slowly. In 1983, the managers of the IRIS project granted an interview to the Washington Post scientific section. During the interview, they declared something that was immediately reported by various American newspapers with expressions of great effect. They actually wrote that astronomers were confused about the presence of a gigantic object, a mysterious celestial body in our solar system, a cosmic enigma. On that occasion, the director of Project IRIS, G. Neugebauer, said that he did not know what this was about, but NASA made a public statement saying that the celestial body or the celestial object IRIS had detected might be approaching Earth and could be the 10th planet that astronomers have been seeking for some time. William Goosh, chairman at the New York Planetarium, says it is possible that a 10th planet has already been reached but has not been observed with optical telescopes. They are looking for it in the southern skies at a distance of approximately 2.5 times that of Neptune. A dark celestial body has also been seen. And in parentheses it says a planet or a brown dwarf star with a question mark, orbiting the area of Sigma Orions. It has been called S. Ori 72. In August of 2000, researchers at Southwest Research Institute in Colorado and University of California, Santa Cruz developed a computerized simulation model which shows that about 4.5 billion years ago, Earth was hit by a celestial body, and at least as large as Mars, perhaps even larger. The impact would have created the moon and projected a large amount of debris all over the space. J. Murray, and in parentheses, United Kingdom's Open University, and J. Matisse, University of Louisiana, affirmed that the gravity exerted by a now invisible but very large body would considerably slow down the exit of terrestrial probes from the solar system. So they're saying that the moon and the asteroid belt were created from some planetary collision. The planet, the Sumerian story continues, this planet, the Sumerian story continues, would be inhabited by those who who they call the Anunnaki. Sitchin literally translate this term with the phrase, those who from heaven came to earth, corresponding to the Bible's Anakim. These individuals who would have landed on our planet in search of gold because this metal was essential to create a sort of greenhouse effect on their planet, pulverized and released into the atmosphere, it would slow the process of gradual cooling that Nibiru was suffering. How can we not recall the myths spread to almost every corner of the earth, spoken of by Western writers like Hesiod, Plato, and Ovid, talking about an unspecified golden age in the far remote past, an era when gods used to live here among us? That's where this is where I believe that, why people believe gold to be something as perceived in value. It traces all back to these aliens coming to Earth, and because the aliens created the humans, and the aliens were here to mine for gold, the humans just by default assumed that gold was something of value because their creator gods were obsessed with it. And it's still that tradition, that belief still carries on to this day. See, gold has many use cases. Gold is like an effective radiation shield. It can be used in technology. It's used in the space travel industry. All right, let's continue. If these stories are true, it becomes easy to identify this primordial time as one in which the gods, that is to say, these beings who have come from above, arrived on Earth in search of gold. These stories would no longer be narratives of fantasy telling of an unreal but desired happy time, but instead would become the retelling of specific events when gods who really were here on Earth, and mining gold was the reason for their presence. Indeed, this was an age entirely devoted to research, mining, and processing of gold, an age when men and direct relationships, or an age when men had a direct relationship with the gods. There's this researcher, his name is Michael Tellinger, and he discovered all these gold mines all over Africa, and all these crazy like megalithic structures and stone structures that were all acoustic, where they would respond to frequencies and vibrations, and everything was acoustic, and there were all these gold mining operations all over in Africa. According to this amazing theory, 600 members of the Anunnaki, Anakites, descended onto our planet in 12 groups of 50 and built their first base in Eridu, an outpost at the extreme south of Mesopotamia, whose name, according to the aforementioned scholars, means home of the faraway world and home away from home. Eridu, this is in the Middle East. They found this city. It's still buried in the sand, like a little bit of it sticking up. But if you can look up photos of it, I mean, they found these cities. They're just not excavated. They don't. The powers that be, they don't want to excavate these ancient sites, because when they excavate them, the people find out what the heck really happened on this planet, which is what I've been saying for years. A bunch of freaking aliens came down here to use this planet for resources. They set up all their cities. They created the human race. They enslaved everyone, and they basically just been down here extorting this planet for resources and farming us and using us at their disposal. It stood on a hill artificially erected at the mouth of the Euphrates River. Perhaps this coincides with the memory about the biblical God of Genesis dividing the waters, see chapter 1, in order to obtain a dry land and make life on earth possible. As we know, the ground was rich in oil and therefore a valuable source of energy for the structures that were to be built. Moreover, the vast plains were appropriate for the construction of landing strips. Oil wars alien gods coming down here trying to take control of the resources and the human race. And these wars are still going on today. That's why there's always wars in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel. This is like oil-rich land. This is like the freaking oil mecca of the world. And whoever controls the energy of the world controls the world. Money is just energy too. So whoever controls the printing of the money, whoever controls the oil and the resources, therefore controls the world and controls the human race. That's why they're always going to war in the Middle East. Also, too, the technology that they discover buried in the sand, all kinds of advanced technology and manuscripts and about how to build like flying saucers and stargates and manuscripts with genetic coding on them and all this stuff and genealogy records. This is all the stuff that they don't want you to know about. This is what's the hidden archaeology that the Christians and the Catholics and the Mormons, they don't teach you about this stuff. Because again, their whole power system, their power structure crumbles when everyone learns about this. The entire expedition was commanded by a being who we might consider the emperor named Anu, the absolute ruler living on Nibiru. Operational direction was initially given to one of his two sons, Enki, who was later joined and eventually replaced by his brother Enlil. A shift of command occurred when Enki took control of the diggings in South African gold mines in the territory that would nowadays correspond to Zimbabwe. The Sumerians say that after tens of thousands of earthly years of laborious digging, the Anunnaki rebelled and demanded to be released. After several attempts to settle what we would today call a labor dispute, Enki developed an alternative solution that would that proved to be truly decisive with hindsight, not only for them but also for us. Commander Enki could observe some small hominids, Homo erectus or Homo habilis, it says in parentheses with a question mark, and thought that they could be genetically modified in order to replace the tired Anunnaki who were constantly protesting and revolting. And that's how we got here. That's us. We were their genetic experiment. They found some kind of lower evolved beings that were already kind of running around on this planet that were probably slowly evolving, and they said, let's splice our DNA with theirs and make them a little bit smarter, but not quite as smart as us, and then boom, we got our slave species. And that's how we got here, folks. All right, let's continue. The Sumerian myth tells us that the gods forced to work in these gold mines digging and piling up earth complained for their quality of life and blamed Enki for their troubled situation. Enki's mother urged her son to intervene and help the Anunnaki, who were working extremely hard. She suggested that he create a substitute for gods, a double, so that they could break free from the burden of work. She suggests that he create or mold some servants. Her son replied that much creatures actually already existed, and he asked her to modify the species and to place upon them the image of themselves, the gods. That's another reference to splicing the DNA, like taking DNA from the gods and splicing it with these Homo erectus that were already running around on this planet. Same exact thing it says in the Bible, like in the book of Genesis, it talks about, and they also use that same description of God creating man in his image, but they even talk about how God taking the rib of, I think, Adam and splicing it and creating Eve. So it's literally just references to taking genetic material from one species and splicing it with another, and then boom, we got a hybrid slave species. Thanks to their scientific knowledge, these Anunnaki conducted a number of experiments genetically manipulating the hominids with grafts of their own DNA. This project was developed in collaboration with Ninhursag, who is Enki's wife, known as the Mother Goddess or Mami, M-A-M-I. And also, she who gives life. Working in their lab, known as Creation Room, after several attempts, many which failed, they produced a new creature called Lulu, meaning the blended one, the mixed one, the product of a mixture of genetic heritage. This new creature was also called Adama, from which we get the biblical Adam, the one on earth, the earthly one. The beings, those who from heaven came to earth, had in fact created Homo sapiens. All this happened about 300,000 years ago in northern Zimbabwe, and it is right around that time and in that part of East Africa that paleontologists would trace the appearance of Homo sapiens. Anunnaki then produced a race of tough workers just intelligent enough to understand their creator's owner's needs and commands. This reminds us of that phrase that says we were created to love and serve God. It probably contains far more truth than one would think. These quote-unquote gods, in effect, created a race destined to menial jobs. Thus, isn't it a curious coincidence that Genesis 2:2 literally tells us that after having created man, the Elohim rested from all of his work? Wasn't this exactly the purpose of the Anunnaki? Damn right it was. And it's got another little photo here of looks like they were doing some genetic manipulation, and it's like one of the Anunnaki holding up one of the specimens and handing it to one of the others. All right, the next page says, 2 short notes. The figure of the Mother Goddess, which is variously studied, analyzed, symbolically interpreted, and psychoanalytically explained as being identified with Mother Earth, is indeed quite simply this female Anunnaki, a medical expert in genetic engineering, who can be quite rightly considered the mother of all mankind. And that's what they find in all those, when they find these cylinder seals and old stone tablets that were buried in the sand for thousands of years in the Middle East. That's what they find. They find descriptions and pictures of these Anunnaki beings holding up their genetic hybrids that they created. All right, and the second note says, geneticists tell us that our DNA differs from that of the primates closest to us for a very insignificant percentage, less than 2%. Could this 2% have been incorporated in hominids to drive the rapid evolutionary development that led our species to its final result, which is Homo sapiens, is what it asks. Obviously, the answer to that question is obvious to me after you start reading through all this stuff. Our closest relatives have culturally and technically evolved much more slowly, to the point that they cannot even be remotely compared to us. Do we really have, quote unquote, something inside us, often referred to as divine, which would merely a portion of the DNA belonging to those individuals who came from above and genetically engineered us? According to the ancient texts, this slave, the Adama or the Lulu, was then used in the gold mining area in South Africa, in an area the gods referred to as base. Enki, who presided over the mining work at the Africa base, was also known as the Lord of Apsu. That is the Lord of the basic or lower parts. The term Apsu or Abzu was later derived into the concept of the abyss as the basic realm, which later took the name and definition of the underworld realm. Here too, the explanation is much simpler than all of the various ruminations generated from religions, anthropology, psychoanalysis, and so on. The real psychoanalytic description of the abyss, of hell, of a subconscious, along with the theories that followed, constituted the basis of the concept of receiving a heavenly reward versus a horrible punishment in an endless hell. The Lord of the Absu, the abyss, was none other than the leader of the mining work in the land at the base, in the depths of the southern mines, obviously considered the lower part of the planet by those who lived in the northern hemisphere. The worker's efficiency made his presence useful also in the land of Sumer. The biblical Shinar is what it says. Homo sapiens then worked for the Anunnaki, delivering services that were progressively more sophisticated. From the simple, brutal ground digging, he eventually became a true servant, useful for any type of task. We see the exact same thing still happening. I mean, look at the way like our whole government is structured with the top-down hierarchy structure of obedience, really is what it is. We live in this like pyramid structure of obedience where you have like these royal bloodlines, kings and queens, and then below them is princes and princesses, and then below them you have this whole hierarchy structure, and then it evolved from the kings and the queens because over in the United States, they basically fought a revolutionary war to say, no, fuck you, we don't want to live under the rulership of the British crown. So you know what they did? They just had to change the language a little bit, and now it's the same thing. It's now we have the president and the vice president, and you have politicians, and then you have the police and the sheriff, and it's the same exact thing. They turned it into a religion. Government is the world's largest religion. It's the religion of statism, where people worship and submit to the authority of the government the same way they would submit to the authorities of these Anunnaki gods. But you know what? Once people stop buying it, once people start calling bullshit, they have to like change it up a little and change the language so that the people fall for it again. And that's exactly what's happened in the United States, is they just evolved it into the religion of statism, where people worship and are obedient to the government. All right, let's continue. This creature would work under control and supervision of the gods, and perhaps it is precisely for the reason that the territory of southern central Mesopotamia was named Sumer, meaning land of the guardians. Here there is also an interesting correspondence with Egyptian stories recalling about the so-called Zep-Tepi, the prime time, the primordial period, when Netiru and the guardians inhabited the earth. Indeed, all Middle Eastern cultures seem to share a common reference to an era where the quote-unquote gods were on earth and watched men working for them and serving them. Men were also taken to their experimental lab of crop cultivation situated in the east in Eden. Eden, the house of the righteous ones, which is God's home, according to Sitchin. The garden. It's where because again, remember all the plants that we have, well, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the plants that we're using today, these were like seeded here by the Anunnaki. They probably were creating not only hybrid humans, but they were creating like different plant species and then seeding the planet with the different plants that they found useful. And, they set all this up. Our agriculture, our architecture, everything came from these Anunnaki gods, and it was just passed along to us. We also know that these new creatures were produced in a series. The process was this: DNA was taken from the young Anunnaki's blood and then inserted into the hominid's egg, or the egg cell. Upon receiving the new genetic material, the egg was then implanted into the uterus of Anunnaki females who carried the fertilized egg through pregnancy and finally childbirth. Both males and females were produced through this technique of genetic engineering. This, by the way, is precisely the function that many myths give to the mother goddess. This new creature, the Adama or the Adam of the Bible, was a hybrid, and as such unable to procreate. The Adama did not possess any knowledge that could make him similar to the gods, such as the ability to give life to another being. The next part is entitled Adam and Eve. There was a constant rivalry between Enki and Enlil, the two sons of the lords of the empire. This rivalry had consequences on the new species that had been created in order to meet the needs of the Anunnaki who worked in the mines. Enki loved his creation and decided to give it the knowledge, the absolute knowledge, which would free it from its creators, the ability to reproduce independently, in short, the know-how that would make it similar to the gods. He did this without the approval of his brother. We report here an element that immediately connects us to the biblical stories. Enki was depicted as a snake, a creature that, living in underground dens, knew the most in-depth secrets. It is therefore correct to say that this snake god, Enki, is the one who gave Eve the ability to reproduce. See, Genesis chapter 3 clearly recalls this event in the story of a snake tempting the woman and encouraging her to access knowledge. That was the sole step that the gods did forbid, because they knew it would take mankind, in parentheses Adam, the earthly, towards the ultimate emancipation and freedom. So you see how they totally twisted that story with the Christian version of the Bible? See, in this translation, in this version, which connects all the dots and fills in all the missing puzzle pieces, the snake, which is Enki, with the snake symbology, the serpent, is actually the good person trying to wake the humans up and being like, hey, look, these freaking people are enslaving you. I'm going to show you the truth and help you break free from your slavery. You see how they twisted that story and reversed it in the Christian Bible? When Enlil, the older brother, came to know of this, he became enraged and then ousted the male and female from Eden. This is the same exact story in the Bible. They just twisted it and they reversed the roles to trick you guys. Let's continue here. So this is when Enlil, the older brother, became aware of this. He became enraged and then basically kicked them out of the Garden of Eden that protected paradise. And then parentheses says paradise, incidentally, is a term that comes from Iranian paradisia, enclosed place. Enlil sentenced them to seek for food themselves. He also told the female she would procreate, experiencing great pain. And this is understandable considering that so far creation was a prerogative only of Anunnaki females. Men then began to multiply on their own and to populate the territory. Now the Bible tells us that the gods' children, whose females were obviously scarce, saw men's Adam and earthly daughters, and they were infatuated. So they joined with them and begot, because the two species were naturally compatible. And this is saying this can also be found in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 8. This fact aroused the wrath Enlil, who did not like the new creature and openly condemned this racial mingling. This is where we get all this BS about how, you're bad, you're a bad human, and it's a sin to have sex. This is all it's all brainwashing. In the meantime, It had also become very difficult to manage the problems resulting from an uncontrollable growing mass of people. Under these difficult situations, Enlil decided to use a natural event that was about to occur in order to erase the atom and all the human beings born from the relationships between the two species. The flood. All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll upload another video, another recording, and continue, but I'm going to take a little break for now. But this is pretty interesting stuff. You see, this connects a lot of the dots and fills in all the missing puzzle pieces and answers all the questions that all the Christians have, because their version is not complete. This completes it.